The darkness of space held many secrets, but none as deadly as Zekathara. The creature moved through the void like death itself, his massive body cutting through the emptiness between stars. 12 feet tall and covered in black armor that seemed to drink light, he was everything that made aliens wake up screaming in the night. Zekathara had earned his name across 1,000 worlds, the Void Reaper, the last thing you see, the hunter of souls. For 3,000 years he had tracked down entire species and wiped them from existence. Not for revenge, not for war, just because he was hungry, and only the life force of thinking beings could feed him. The Caraxian Empire had tried to stop him first. Their energy weapons that could crack planets in half did nothing but tickle his armored hide. Their battle fleets that numbered in the millions became floating graveyards in less than a day. Zekathara walked through their capital city and left. Nothing but empty shells where proud warriors once stood. The peaceful Delrani came next. They tried to reason with him, offering tribute and negotiation. Zekathara listened to their pleas with 6 glowing eyes before draining the life from their entire delegation. Their crystal cities went dark one by one as he moved through their territory like a plague. Then came the Vexari Collective, masters of technology that could bend reality itself. Their quantum shields and probability weapons made them believe they were untouchable. They learned differently when Zekathara phased through their defenses like they were made of paper. The screams of a billion minds linked as one created a symphony that still echoed in the dead sectors where their worlds used to spin. Each kill made him stronger. Each species he destroyed added to his power. The fear he spread across the galaxy was like a second meal, feeding him even when he rested. No alliance could stand against him. No weapon could hurt him. No plea could reach whatever heart might have once beat in his chest. The Galactic Council tried everything. They offered him entire sectors to rule if he would just stop killing. They sent their best diplomats with promises of worship and service. They even tried to find other sources of life force that might satisfy his hunger. Nothing worked. Zekathara took what they offered and kept hunting. Now only scattered colonies remained in the outer rim, hiding in the empty spaces between stars and praying he would not find them. But Zekathara always found them. His hunger never stopped, and his senses could track the spark of intelligent life across impossible distances. Today, that hunger had led him to a small mining world called Kepler 442b. The planet sat alone in an unremarkable system, far from any major trade routes. Its only value was the rare metals buried in its crust, metals that a small group of humans had come to dig up and take home. Humans. Zekathara had heard of them, but never bothered to hunt them before. They were new to the galaxy, only recently, stumbling out of their home system with primitive ships and simple weapons. Most of the older species barely considered them worth noticing. Just another young race that would probably destroy itself before it became important. But life force was life force, and Zekathara was always hungry. He had arrived at the mining colony 3 days ago, moving through the facility like a shadow, made solid. The humans tried to fight at first. Their projectile weapons bounced off his armor like raindrops. Their explosives barely scratched his hide. Their screams, however, were quite satisfying. 43 humans had lived on Kepler 442b when Zekathara arrived. Now 43 empty shells lay scattered through the tunnels and buildings, their eyes staring at nothing, their minds long since consumed. The Void Reaper had fed well, but as always, the hunger returned. He stood now in the colony's main laboratory, studying the data terminals with mild interest. The humans had been researching the planet's geology, but they had found something else buried in the deep rocks. Ancient markers, old hunting grounds, signs that his own people had once used this world as a feeding station. Back when the Vorthak ruled this part of the galaxy, the discovery meant nothing to him. The past was dead, like everything else he touched. But as he prepared to leave and hunt for more prey, something caught his attention. One of the human terminals was still active, playing a recorded message on repeat. A female human appeared on the screen, her face tight with fear, but her voice steady. She wore the white coat of a scientist and kept looking over her shoulder, as if expecting death to walk through the door at any moment. This is Dr. Amy Patterson, Chief Researcher at Kepler Mining Station 7. If anyone receives this message, you need to warn Earth. We found something in the deep excavations, ancient symbols, feeding grounds. And now it's here, the thing that eats you. Old races whisper about. The Void Reaper itself. The woman's composure cracked for a moment and real terror showed in her eyes. God help us, it's coming for Earth next. I can feel it in the way it moves, the way it looks at our data. It knows where we came from. It knows how to find our home. 40 billion people, and it's going to hunt them all. The message ended and began again, the dead woman's warning playing to empty air. Zekathara studied the recording with something that might have once been curiosity. Earth, the human homeworld, 40 billion mines to harvest, 40 billion sources of life force to drain. Yes, that would feed him for quite some time. The Void Reaper turned away from the terminal and began walking toward his ship. Behind him, the recorded warning played, on, echoing through the empty halls where nothing lived anymore. Soon, he would visit this Earth place. Soon, the humans would learn why the galaxy feared his name. But first, he had detected another signal. Another small ship approaching the FABD mining colony. More humans coming to investigate their lost friends. Perfect. He would feed on them here, learn what he could about their species and their defenses. Consider it a preview of the feast to come. Zekathara smiled, revealing teeth like black knives. The hunt would begin again soon. The HSS Wanderer dropped out of hyperspace with a shudder that ran through its hull. Commander Jake Morrison felt the familiar lurch in his stomach as the ship's engines wound down from their faster-than-light burn. Through the bridge windows, Kepler 442b hung like a brown marble against the black of space. "Reading the mining colony now, sir," reported Communications Officer Danny Sullivan from his station. No response to our hails. The automatic beacon is still transmitting, but there's no human chatter on any frequency. Morrison frowned. The distress call had been garbled and incomplete, but it had contained enough panic to justify the 3-week journey from Earth's outer colonies. Kepler Mining Station 7 had been one of humanity's most successful deep space operations, pulling rare metals from an otherwise worthless world. "Life signs?" Morrison asked. Engineer Lisa Chen checked her scanners and shook her head. "Nothing showing up on the biosensors, Commander, but the colony's power grid is still active, and I'm reading atmosphere in all the main sections." Pilot Roy Martinez was already plotting their approach vector. "Want me to take us down to the landing pad?" "Do it," Morrison ordered, "but keep the engines warm. Something about this doesn't feel right." The Wanderer was a small exploration vessel, designed for quick surveys and first contact missions. Her crew of 12 was hand-picked for versatility rather than combat. Morrison preferred it that way. In his 20 years of space service, he had learned that most problems could be solved with patience and good sense rather than firepower. The landing was smooth despite Roy's nervous energy. The pilot had been flying since he was 16 and could thread a needle with a starship, but empty colonies made everyone jumpy. Too many stories came back from the outer rim about settlements that went dark for no good reason. Morrison suited up with a standard away team: Lisa, Danny, and Dr. Helen Brooks, the ship's medical officer. The rest of the crew would monitor from orbit and be ready for a quick extraction if needed. The airlock cycled open with a hiss, and Morrison stepped onto the surface of Kepler 442b. The mining colony stretched out before them, a collection of low buildings connected by covered walkways. Everything looked normal from the outside. No damage, no signs of struggle. Just empty. "Atmosphere's good," Helen reported, checking her scanner. "Temperature normal. No toxic readings." They made their way to the main entrance, where the doors stood wide open. Morrison drew his sidearm more from habit than any real hope it would help. If something had wiped out 43 people without leaving any trace, a pistol probably, would not make much difference. The colony's interior was worse than Morrison had expected. Bodies lay scattered through the halls like discarded toys. Men and women he had known, people who had shared drinks with him during supply runs, now stared at nothing with empty eyes. But there was no blood, no wounds, no sign of violence at all. They just looked drained, like someone had sucked the life right out of them. Jesus, Danny whispered. What could do this? Helen knelt beside one of the bodies, a young engineer named Pete Garcia. Morrison remembered him as a loud, cheerful kid from Texas who told terrible jokes and sent half his pay home to his family. Now Pete's face was gray and sunken, his body weighing maybe half what it should. I've never seen anything like this, Helen said, running her medical scanner over the corpse. No injuries, no disease markers, no toxins. It's like something just drained away his life force. Morrison felt ice forming in his stomach. He had heard stories from the older ship captains, tales they told in quiet voices after too many drinks. Stories about things that hunted in the dark between stars, creatures that fed on the minds and souls of living beings. Keep moving, he ordered. We need to find the research data and get out of here. They made their way deeper into the colony, past laboratories and living quarters, where more bodies lay scattered like leaves. Morrison tried not to look at their faces, tried not to remember the names and stories that went with each empty shell. The main laboratory was at the center of the complex, a large room filled with computer terminals and analysis equipment. Most of the screens were dark, but one terminal near the back was still active, playing a recorded message on a loop. Morrison recognized Dr. Amy Patterson immediately. She had been the head researcher here, a brilliant woman who had discovered 3 new elements in the deep rock samples. Now she stared out from the screen with terrified eyes, warning about ancient hunting grounds and something called the Void Reaper. Earth, Morrison said quietly. It's going to hunt Earth. The message finished and began again. Morrison was reaching for the terminal to copy the data when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing the laboratory in red light. But in that moment of darkness, something had changed. The air felt different, colder, like death itself had walked into the room. Commander, Lisa whispered, we're not alone. Morrison turned slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. At the far end of the laboratory near the main entrance, something impossible stood watching them. The creature was 12 feet tall and covered in armor that seemed to absorb the emergency lighting. 6 eyes glowed like dying stars in a head that belonged in nightmares. When it moved, Morrison could see glimpses of it phasing in and out of solid matter, as if reality could not quite decide whether it was really there. More prey, the thing said in perfect English, its voice like grinding stone. Your species will provide adequate sustenance before I continue to your homeworld. Morrison felt his crew tense behind him. Lisa had her hand on her sidearm. Danny was backing toward the rear exit. Helen had her medical scanner raised like it might somehow protect her. All normal reactions when faced with something that should not exist. But Morrison found himself thinking about Pete Garcia's family back, on Earth, about the 40 billion people who had no idea that death was coming for them. About the empty eyes of the 43 colonists who had died here because they had been unlucky enough to find the wrong thing buried in the rocks. The creature expected fear. Morrison could see it in the way it held itself, in the satisfied gleam of its 6 eyes. It was used to terror and begging and desperate attempts to run. It fed on that fear as much as it fed on life itself. So instead of giving it what it wanted, Morrison did something completely unexpected. He stepped forward and asked, "Are you having a bad day, buddy?" The silence that followed was so complete that Morrison could hear his own heartbeat. The creature just stood there, its glowing eyes fixed on him with something that might have been confusion. Behind Morrison, Lisa made a small, choking sound. "Commander," she whispered urgently. "What are you doing?" But Morrison was watching the creature's face, seeing something he had not expected. Uncertainty. This thing had probably killed millions of people across thousands of years, but nobody had ever asked if it was okay. "Look," Morrison continued, keeping his voice calm and conversational. "I don't know what your deal is, but you seem really upset about something. Want to talk about it?" The creature's feeding tendrils writhed in what Morrison hoped was confusion rather than preparation for attack. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Void Reaper was completely at a loss for words, and somewhere in the back of his mind, Morrison wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake in human history, or possibly the most important discovery of all time. Zekthara stared at the human for what felt like an eternity. In 3,000 years of hunting, feeding, and killing, nothing had prepared him for this moment. Prey did not ask about his feelings. Prey ran, screamed, begged, and died. Prey did not show concern for his well-being. The human standing before him was small, barely reaching Zekthara's chest even at his full height. His uniform marked him as some kind of leader, and his weapon remained holstered despite the obvious danger. But it was his eyes that confused the Vorthak Prime the most. They held no fear, no hatred, no desperation, just genuine worry, as if he truly cared about the answer to his question. "I do not understand," Zekthara finally said, his voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. "You are prey. I am the hunter. You should be running." Morrison tilted his head slightly, like someone trying to understand a difficult concept. "Why would I run? You look like you need someone to talk to more than you need someone to chase." Behind Morrison, his crew exchanged glances that mixed terror with confusion. Lisa Chen had her hand frozen halfway to her weapon, unsure whether drawing it would help or make things worse. Danny Sullivan was recording everything, his training as a communications officer overriding his fear. Dr. Helen Brooks stood ready to treat injuries, though she had no idea how to heal someone who had been drained of their life force. Zekthara's 6 eyes studied each human in turn, then returned to Morrison. "You know what I am. You have seen what I do to your kind, yet you show no fear." "Oh, I'm scared," Morrison admitted with a small smile. "I'd be stupid not to be. But being scared and being curious aren't the same thing. And right now, I'm more curious than scared." The Void Reaper felt something stir in his mind, an emotion he had thought long dead. When was the last time anyone had been curious about him rather than terrified? When had anyone wanted to understand rather than simply survive? "You killed these people," Morrison continued, gesturing at the empty shells scattered around the laboratory. "But you're still here. If you just wanted to feed and move on, you would have left already. So what's keeping you?" Zekthara's armored plates shifted as something like surprise ran through him. The human was right. He should have departed hours ago, should already be tracking the trail back to their homeworld. Instead, he had remained, studying their data, learning about their species. But why? "I hunt because I must," Zekthara said slowly, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "My people are dying, have been dying for millennia. Only the life force of intelligent beings can sustain us now." Morrison nodded as if this made perfect sense. "So you're not doing this because you want to. You're doing it because you have to survive." "Survival is everything," Zekthara replied, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "My species once ruled a quarter of this galaxy. Now I am among the last. If I do not feed, if I do not grow stronger, the Vorthak will cease to exist." "That's a hell of a responsibility," Morrison said quietly. "Carrying the weight of an entire species on your shoulders must be lonely." Lonely. The word hit Zekthara like a physical blow. When had he last spoken to another being without killing them? When had he last had a conversation rather than simply announcing their doom? The isolation of 3,000 years suddenly pressed down on him like a crushing weight. "Danny," Morrison said without turning around, "are you getting all this?" "Yes, sir," the communications officer replied, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Full recording, and I've got a link established with Dr. Foster at Mars Research Station." Morrison looked back at Zekthara. "Would you mind if we brought in a specialist? Someone who might understand your situation better than we do?" The question was so absurd that Zekthara almost laughed. Prey asking permission to call for help. Prey treating him like a guest rather than a threat. Everything about this interaction violated the natural order of predator and prey. "Do what you wish," he said finally. "It will not change your fate." But even as he spoke the words, Zekthara found himself curious about what this specialist might say. It had been so long since he had learned anything new, since anyone had surprised him. The communication link crackled to life, and a new voice filled the laboratory. "This is Dr. Karen Foster, xenobiologist at Mars Research Station. Commander Morrison, are you actually having a conversation with a Vorthak Prime?" "Seems that way," Morrison replied. "Dr. Foster, meet Zekthara. Zekthara, this is Dr. Foster. She studies alien biology." "The Void Reaper," Dr. Foster breathed. "I've read the classified reports. The Council believes you're responsible for the extinction of at least 12 species." 15, Zekthara corrected automatically. "The reports underestimate my efficiency." "My God," Dr. Foster said. "You mentioned your people are dying. Can you tell me about this silent death that affected your species?" Zekthara's eyes narrowed. "How do you know that name?" "We have fragments of Vorthak historical records. Ancient data cores found in dead systems. The silent death appears to have been some kind of quantum plague that attacked your people's ability to process life energy directly." For the first time in millennia, Zekthara felt something approaching hope. Someone understood. Someone had studied his people's history, had cared enough to learn about their struggle. "The plague turned us into parasites," he said, his voice heavy with old pain. "We who once fed on stellar radiation and cosmic background energy became dependent on the life force of other beings. We tried to resist, tried to find other sources of sustenance, but hunger is stronger than conscience." Morrison stepped closer, and Zekthara realized he was no longer thinking of the human as prey. "How many of your people are left?" "Perhaps a dozen, scattered across the galaxy, all hunting, all feeding, all slowly going mad from isolation and guilt." "Guilt?" Dr. Foster's voice was sharp with interest. "You feel guilt about what you do?" Zekthara was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "We remember what we were. Every life I take, I remember the scientists and artists and dreamers my people once were. But the hunger drives us beyond reason, beyond choice." Morrison exchanged a look with his crew. Lisa had lowered her hand from her weapon entirely. Danny was frantically taking notes. Helen was staring at Zekthara with the expression of someone seeing a patient rather than a monster. "What if we could help?" Morrison asked suddenly. "What if there was another way?" Zekthara's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Help? You are prey. I am the predator. That is the natural order." "Says who?" Morrison shot back. "Maybe the natural order is wrong. Maybe there's something better than predator and prey." Dr. Foster's voice cut through the static of the communication link. "Commander, I'm looking at the biological data your scanners are picking up. The quantum signature of this plague is similar to theoretical models we've been working on. Human immune systems operate on chaos principles that might actually be resistant to this kind of quantum interference." Morrison grinned. "In other words, we might be able to cure your people." Zekthara stared at the small human who had just offered to save his entire species. The creature who should have been running in terror was instead proposing to heal a plague that had destroyed the greatest civilization in galactic history. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Void Reaper felt something other than hunger. He felt hope, and it terrified him more than any weapon ever could. 3 days had passed since the impossible conversation in the mining colony laboratory. Zekthara found himself aboard the human research station orbiting Mars, surrounded by beings he had once considered nothing more than food. The irony was not lost on him that the galaxy's most feared predator was now sitting in a medical bay, allowing his supposed prey to study his biology. Dr. Karen Foster worked tirelessly at her analysis station, her eyes red from lack of sleep. Around her, displays showed complex molecular structures and quantum wave patterns that hurt Zekthara's eyes to look at. The human scientists moved with a purpose that reminded him of his own people in the old days, before the plague had turned them into monsters. "The quantum signature is definitely artificial," Dr. Foster announced to the assembled team. "This wasn't a natural plague. Someone or something created it deliberately." Commander Morrison leaned forward in his chair. Since returning from Kepler 442b, he had been coordinating with Earth Defense Force and the Galactic Council, trying to explain why humanity was suddenly harboring the galaxy's most wanted predator. The conversations had not gone well. Created by who? Morrison asked. Zekthara's 6 eyes dimmed with old memory. We never learned. The plague appeared simultaneously across our entire empire, affecting every Vorthak world at once. By the time we understood what was happening, it was too late to trace its origin. Dr. Helen Brooks looked up from her medical scanners. The interesting thing is how it affects your cellular structure. It's like something rewrote your DNA to require external life force instead of processing energy directly from radiation. Can it be reversed? Morrison asked. Dr. Foster hesitated. Theoretically, yes. Human immune systems produce antibodies that operate on quantum uncertainty principles. They're chaotic enough to potentially disrupt the plague's programming, but the treatment would be risky. Zekthara felt his feeding tendrils twitch with nervousness. Define risky. It could kill you, Dr. Foster said bluntly. Or it could cure you completely. Or it could leave you somewhere in between, unable to feed on life force but also unable to process natural energy. You'd essentially starve to death slowly. The silence that followed was broken by an urgent chime from the communications console. Danny Sullivan's face appeared on the main screen, his expression grim. Commander, we have a problem. Long-range sensors are picking up 3 Vorthak signatures approaching the system. They'll be here in less than 6 hours. Zekthara's armored plates bristled. Velkaran, he growled. My former student. He has come to challenge me. Morrison stood up quickly. Challenge you for what? Leadership of our people. In Vorthak society, any prime who shows weakness can be challenged by another. If Velkaran defeats me, he becomes the dominant hunter. Zekthara's voice carried a note of ancient sadness. He will view my cooperation with you as the ultimate weakness. Dr. Foster saved her data and began preparing portable versions of the treatment. How long do we have before they arrive? 5 hours, 53 minutes, Danny reported. Sir, Admiral Clark is demanding we turn Zekthara over to Galactic Council custody immediately. She says harboring him is an act of war against every species in the galaxy. Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him. On one hand, he understood the Admiral's position. Zekthara had killed billions of sentient beings over 3 millennia. On the other hand, they were so close to a breakthrough that could save not just the Vorthak, but potentially every species in the galaxy. Tell the Admiral we need more time, Morrison said finally, and start evacuation procedures for all non-essential personnel. Zekthara watched the humans prepare for battle and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Shame. These beings were risking their lives for him, and he had spent 3,000 years hunting their kind across the galaxy. You should surrender me, he said quietly. Velkaran will not harm you if you give me to him. He follows the old codes. Prey that surrenders hunting prizes is left unharmed. Morrison looked at him with those steady eyes that had started this whole chain of events. Is that what you want us to do? The question hit Zekthara harder than any weapon. What did he want? For 3 millennia, he had wanted only to feed, to survive, to keep his species from extinction. But now, surrounded by beings who saw him as more than just a monster, he found himself wanting something different. I want to try the treatment, he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. Even if it kills me. I want to know what it feels like to choose something other than hunger. Dr. Foster looked up from her preparations. The treatment isn't ready. I need at least 12 hours to synthesize enough antibodies and create a proper delivery system. Then we fight, Morrison said simply. We hold them off until the treatment is ready. Zekthara laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. You cannot fight Vorthak primes, little human. Your weapons are useless against us. Your ships are too slow. Velkaran will phase through your defenses and drain the life from everyone on this station. Maybe, Morrison agreed. But we've got something Velkaran doesn't expect. Which is? Morrison grinned, and Zekthara saw something in that expression that reminded him of the old Vorthak warriors, the ones who had faced impossible odds with laughter on their lips. "We've got you." The truth hit Zekthara like a supernova. These humans were not just offering to cure him. They were asking him to protect them. They wanted the galaxy's greatest predator to become their guardian instead of their destroyer. "You would trust me in battle beside you?" Zekthara asked. "You've had 3 days to kill us all," Dr. Brooks pointed out. "Instead, you've been patient with our tests and honest about your people's history. I'd say you've already proven yourself." Zekthara felt something crack inside his chest, some barrier he had built around his heart millennia ago. These humans did not see him as a monster pretending to be civilized. They saw him as a person who had done monstrous things, but was trying to change. "Very well," he said, rising to his full height. "I will stand with you against Velkaran. But understand, young humans, that what comes will test us all. Velkaran is everything I once was, everything the galaxy fears about my kind. He will show no mercy, no hesitation, no doubt." Morrison checked his sidearm and looked around at his crew. Lisa was calibrating the station's defensive systems. Danny was coordinating with Earth Defense Force ships that were racing toward Mars, but would not arrive in time. Helen was preparing emergency medical supplies for the wounded. "Then we'll just have to be better than him," Morrison said. Outside the station, the darkness of space seemed to pulse with approaching danger. Soon, the galaxy's 2 greatest predators would face each other in battle. But for the first time, in 3,000 years, Zekthara would not be fighting alone. He would be fighting for something more important than survival. He would be fighting for the chance to become something better than what he was. And that, he realized, was worth any risk. The attack came without warning. One moment, the Mars research station was floating peacefully in orbit, and the next, 3 massive shadows were phasing through its hull like it was made of smoke. Alarms screamed through the corridors as emergency. Bulkheads slammed shut, trying to contain the breach that could not be contained. Velkaran materialized in the main laboratory with 2 other Vorthak warriors flanking him. He was younger than Zekthara, but just as large, his armored hide gleaming, with fresh kills. 6 burning eyes swept the room, taking in the human scientists cowering behind their equipment and the elaborate medical apparatus that filled the space. "So," Velkaran said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute predation, "the great Void Reaper has fallen so far that he hides among prey like a wounded animal." Zekthara stepped forward from the shadows where he had been waiting. The familiar weight of combat readiness settled over him like an old coat, but something was different now. For 3,000 years, he had fought only for survival and dominance. Today, he fought for something else entirely. "Velkaran," Zekthara acknowledged. "You have grown strong since I last saw you." "Strong enough to claim leadership of our people," the younger Vorthak replied. "Strong enough to end this shameful display of weakness you call cooperation." Behind Velkaran, the 2 warrior Vorthaks spread out, their feeding tendrils writhing with anticipation. Commander Morrison and his team had taken defensive positions around the laboratory, but their weapons would be useless against creatures that could phase through solid matter at will. "These humans offer us a cure," Zekthara said, gesturing toward Dr. Foster's research station. "A way to end the hunger that has driven us mad for millennia." Velkaran's laugh was like the sound of dying stars. "A cure? From prey? You have truly lost your mind, old one. There is no cure for what we are. There is only the hunt, the feed, the endless hunger that makes us strong. The hunger makes us slaves," Zekthara replied. "We were once builders, creators, artists. The plague reduced us to parasites feeding on the achievements of others." "And what is wrong with that?" Velkaran demanded. "We are apex predators. It is our right to feed on lesser species." "Your weakness disgusts me." The younger Vorthak's armored plates began to glow with combat energy. Around the laboratory, the humans pressed themselves against the walls, knowing that the coming battle would likely destroy everything in its path. But Morrison surprised everyone by stepping between the 2 massive predators. "Wait," he said, his voice calm despite the impossibility of his position. "Velkaran, is it? Before you 2 tear each other, Apart, can I ask you something? Velcorin stared down at the tiny human who dared to interrupt a challenge between Vorthak primes. Speak quickly, pray. Your words will not save you. When did you last feel proud of something you accomplished? Morrison asked. Not satisfied with a kill or pleased with a successful hunt, but actually proud of creating something beautiful or solving a difficult problem. The question caught Velcorin off guard. His glowing eyes flickered with confusion. I do not understand. Zekthara told us about the old days, when your people built crystal cities and composed symphonies that could be heard across star systems. When did you last create something instead of destroying it? That weakness is what brought the plague upon us, Velcorin snarled. We grew soft, grew complacent. The hunger taught us strength. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. So you're saying, your people were punished for being creative and peaceful? That the only way to be strong is to feed on others? That sounds like the logic of the thing that created the plague in the first place. Velcorin's feeding tendrils stopped writhing. For the first time since entering the laboratory, he looked uncertain. Dr. Foster chose that moment to speak up from her workstation. We've identified the quantum signature of whatever created the plague that changed your species. It's definitely artificial, definitely designed to turn your people into predators. Someone or something wanted you to become monsters. Lies, Velcorin said, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence is right here, Dr. Foster continued, displaying her data on the main screen. The plague was engineered to activate specific genes in Vorthak DNA while suppressing others. It was designed to increase aggression and reduce empathy. Someone turned your people into weapons. Zekthara studied the data with growing horror. We were made into this. Our transformation was not natural evolution or divine punishment. We were deliberately corrupted. Velcorin stared at the genetic evidence, his worldview crumbling around him. Everything he believed about Vorthak's superiority and the righteousness of the hunt was based on artificial programming. Even if this is true, he said finally, it changes nothing. We are what we are. We cannot go back. But you can go forward, Morrison said. You can choose to be something different. And if we try this cure and it fails? If we die? Morrison smiled, that steady smile that had started everything. Then at least you'll die as yourselves instead of as someone else's weapons. The battle, when it came, was not between Vorthak warriors. It was between the old way of thinking and the possibility of change. Velcorin's two companions looked to him for leadership, confused by the revelations about their species' true history. Dr. Foster had managed to prepare a small sample of the experimental treatment during the conversation. It sat in a crystalline injector on her workstation, glowing with soft blue light. 1 dose, she said. Enough to test whether the theory works. But someone has to volunteer to try it first. Zekthara reached for the injector without hesitation. I will. Velcorin's hand shot out, stopping him. No, if anyone tests this cure, it should be me. I am young and strong. If it fails, the loss will be less significant. Morrison watched the exchange with something approaching awe. The galaxy's most feared predators were arguing over who should risk their life to test a cure that might save their species. Actually, Dr. Brooks interrupted, we should test it on someone who's already weakened. The treatment works by replacing quantum-corrupted cells with healthy ones. If we try it on someone at full strength, the shock might kill them. Zekthara looked down at his armored hands, remembering the countless lives he had taken, the civilizations he had destroyed. Then it should be me. I have the most to atone for. He took the injector and pressed it against his neck. The liquid fire that coursed through his veins was like nothing he had ever experienced. His vision went white, then black, then filled, with colors that had no names. When the convulsion stopped, Zekthara lay on the laboratory floor, his massive form curled like a child. Morrison knelt beside him, checking for vital signs with equipment designed for humans, but apparently universal, enough to work on alien predators. He's alive, Morrison announced. Heart rate stable, brain activity normal. Zekthara's eyes opened slowly. They no longer glowed with predatory hunger. Instead, they held something Morrison had never seen in a Vorthak before. Peace. I can feel it. Zekthara whispered. The hunger is gone, the endless, driving need to feed. For the first time in 3,000 years, I am free. Velkaran stared at his former teacher with a mixture of wonder and fear. How do you feel? Zekthara sat up slowly, testing his transformed body. Weak, but also whole. Like I remember who I used to be before the plague took everything away. Dr. Foster was already preparing more doses of the treatment. We'll need to test this on volunteers, refine the formula, make sure there are no long-term side effects, but the initial results are promising. Morrison looked around the laboratory at the strange gathering. Humans who had risked everything to help their former enemies, and Vorthak predators who were choosing to abandon 3 millennia of killing for the chance to rediscover who they used to be. So what happens now? Morrison asked. Zekthara stood on unsteady legs, no longer the galaxy's most feared predator, but not yet sure what he was becoming. Now we find the others. My people scattered across the galaxy, still hunting, still trapped by the hunger. We offer them the same choice you offered me. Velkaran nodded slowly. And we find whoever created the plague. They turned us into monsters once. We must ensure they never do so again. Morrison grinned and held out his hand to Zekthara. Partners? The former Void Reaper looked at the offered hand for a long moment, then reached out and shook it with surprising gentleness. Partners. Outside the research station, the stars seemed brighter somehow, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. The strongest predator had not fled from humanity out of fear or defeat. He had fled toward the possibility of becoming something better than what he was, and in doing so, he had shown the galaxy that even monsters could choose redemption if someone was brave enough to offer it. Dr. Foster looked up from her research data with a tired but satisfied smile. You know, Commander, I think this is going to be the beginning of a very interesting friendship. Morrison nodded, watching Zekthara help Velkaran understand the cure they were preparing for the rest of their people. Yeah, he said. I think you're right. The hunt was over. The healing could begin.